This is SoundNotion, the weekly podcast for new music and music news. I'm Patrick Gullo.
I'm David McDonald.
And I'm Sam Merciers.
And this morning we're happy to have with us composer Scott Wheeler, whose new CD of orchestral music, Crazy Weather, was just released on BMOP Sound on August 13th. That's the Boston Modern Orchestra Project, a collaborator of his. We'll be talking about some more music and a number of things this morning, I'd imagine. Scott, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
So Scott, I wanted to get into first, we're going to talk about your new release, and as a portion of that is going to be our pick of the week. But first, I wanted to talk about your newest project. You were co-commissioned by Beth Morrison Projects and Boston Lyric Opera for an opera. So why don't we start with that and tell us all about it?
Well, this is my fourth opera, actually. The project came from the librettist Cerise Jacobs, and the opera is called Naga, and it's part of a trilogy of operas she has that she calls the Ouroboros trilogy. The first of those operas to occur is Madame Whitesnake, which won the Pulitzer Prize. It's Joe Long's the composer, won the Pulitzer Prize back about 4 years ago. So it turns out that that Cerise always had in mind to do these other two linked libretti. So she decided that she would commission me and Paola Prestini to write the other parts of the trilogy. I don't know of anybody who's ever done this before, where a single librettist has characters that match up and go from one opera to the next, much like the Wagner Ring cycle, but to choose different composers to do it, and then to put it on like the Ring cycle. Absolutely all three operas going on in 1 week, actually in 1 day in a couple of cases, in September of 2016 in Boston.
Wow.
That sounds incredible. It's like a gigantic FAE sonata.
FAE, yeah. Well, that's right, or a number of other possible projects. So it's Exquisite Corpse or something like that. I don't know. Anyway, so yeah, so I'm very excited about it. Obviously, we've got an amazing cast. I can tell you some of the people who are singing in it. I don't know if this is a new music crowd. Maybe you don't know the opera singers, but believe me, they're major young opera singers that we have in all of these casts. If you talk to Beth Morrison, who is also producing this, that you would know about David Little, the opera composer, who has a new opera on JFK. His Kennedy is Matt Worth, is his baritone, and he's also my monk in mine. Naga is based on roughly on Chinese folk materials. The Madame Whitesnake is the main character, and she is she's the folk character. But Cerise brings in aspects of the Bible, of other myths such as Gilgamesh. Paola's whole piece is called Gilgamesh, and William Blake is involved. So it becomes a kind of a mix of mythologies and religions and quest tales of various things that run through the three operas. The other thing about them is that there's no specific order, there is a specific order, but you can start in any place in it, and the operas move forward. So it's a gigantic conception. I have 5 principal characters, chorus and children's chorus, and an orchestra of about 30. So each opera will be about 90 to 100 minutes long, done without intermission. Wow. So the plan in September is I think we're going to start with mine before lunch, like an 11 a.m. performance. Then people take a lunch break, and then there's an afternoon opera and a dinner break and an evening opera. Then a week later they'll do them in a different order. And then over the course of the week, each opera gets one evening where it's the only opera being done. So each of us gets 3 times through our our piece. There are 9 opera performances in the course of that week. Some double casting going on. Anthony Roth Costanzo is a wonderful countertenor who sings at the Met and all over the world, both my piece and Paula's. My conductor is David Angus, who is the music director of Boston Lyric Opera, which is co-commissioning my piece. I'm based in Boston. In fact, I'm based at Emerson College. The Boston Celebrity Series is presenting it. There are numerous collaborators. The Boston Children's Chorus is involved. I've been talking to them and going to their concerts and learning how they sing, and so that I can work on writing for them. I've been meeting with all the various singers. I have some sketches tomorrow I'll be showing to my soprano Marie-Ève Munger, who's based in Montreal. And she'll be down in New York, and we're going to meet at the National Opera Center and sing through some stuff so that I know how to write for her amazing coloratura soprano. Mm-hmm. She's the White Snake, and the White Snake does things vocally that no one else can do.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Dave.
I was going to ask, so there are all these kind of narrative connections between the 3 operas. Are there any musical connections
No.
Now that you've heard Zhou piece?
Yes, I have Zhou piece, and I have listened to it, and I want to be sure to that it's very beautiful piece, and it gives me inspiration, and I think totally differently about music and about opera, and I'm sure Paula thinks totally differently as well. I already heard a little bit of some drafts of some of her work, and we're all going to be sharing our drafts with each other, and of course with Cerise and Beth. So it's all a very chummy and collegial project. We all went to see a performance of Zhou at Lincoln Center. Chamber Music Society did a piece of Zhou, and Beth and Paula and I all went and talked to him afterwards. And but no, we're not going to use the same themes. There's plenty going on in the libretto. It should change. I think that it should change world in just the right way as it goes from opera to opera. I didn't mention that Michael Counts is our director and designer for the whole thing. And he has certain things in mind. He's been working on holograph projections for the opera that are sort of state-of-the-art creation of things on stage through electronics. And I kind of think that will tend to unify the evening as well, or unify the whole setup. So I think as different as the music can be of the 3 operas, that probably is the best thing. And I don't think we can avoid that anyway. I think that's what's going to happen.
So Michael Counts is the production designer for
all 3.
All 3. That's actually a very good idea to give it a cohesive quality.
And stage director. I mean, he'll be talking to people, and I don't know. This is mythology. Mm-hmm. This is grand themes of life and death going on. It's very much the kind of background opera in the opera world. I would say it's possibly closest to Frau ohne Schatten of Strauss and Hofmannsthal. It certainly relates to the Magic Flute of Mozart and to Wagner. All the great mythological characters that go on, different worlds intersecting, that kind of thing. But obviously, we're all modern composers writing now, and it's going to come out to the sound of what we're doing. However, of course, the voice doesn't change. Instruments change, harmonies change. There are aspects of things. In certain ways, you can go to Mozart, and actually I go before Mozart to Monteverdi and various pre-classical composers for vocal inspiration all the time. The instrumental part comes out different, but vocal, especially within a language, especially anybody writing in English, Benjamin Britten, Purcell, all of these are very, very good sources for how the English language works when it is sung. Dowland or Campion, various kinds of things. Whereas the accompaniment is going to sound something like modern music, and that's where you get the flavor of it. Going from opera to opera, I'm imagining that what's going to happen is that the music is going to change the lighting, because music and lighting always work together to create the basic atmosphere of a piece. Mm-hmm. And I hope there's variety within them, but I can imagine that Michael, when he hears the three different pieces, is going to need to light them differently.
So you mentioned that going back to these early text settings in opera and pre-classical music like Monteverdi, and then early people setting English text. I'm curious what things you're getting, like what are you getting out of Dowland that you're expressing in your opera?
Oh, how do you use melisma? How does it work? How does a line feel on English words? I studied with the composer Virgil Thompson, who was intensely concerned with this, and he had a kind of a system on it which I loved, having to do with the lengths of vowels, long vowels versus short vowels, long consonants versus short consonants, and word accents and word groupings. So he made certain points that in English, for instance, how do you do? To set the phrase how do you do is a single word. You can't actually set them as separate things and keep the sense of the English language. If you want it to be understood and you want your music to lock in to the words, which is of course a great thing to do. You could choose not to, but it should be a special. Your basic mode should be to connect to the words, really. That if you want that to connect in that way, then your best bet is to listen hard to what's long, what's short, and what's accented, and what words go together, what syllables belong together.
In speech, you mean?
In speech,
Right.
because if you, yeah, that's right, because you have to find some way to have it go so that it sounds natural when it's sung. So much of music that one hears doesn't do that. It violates those principles when people set it, and you wonder why the text seems to be just sitting there randomly on top of a melody line. Oh, it's because it was conceived musically and then the text added, or just somebody floated free from the basic verbal situation. So that's what I mean when I say you look back to the whole history of the setting in the language. Setting English is very different from setting French or Italian or German.
Yeah, and I hear people say all the time, American, especially vocalists that are composers, often I hear from say things that English is not a great language to set, and I'm not sure that that's the case. I think it's a different challenge, though, like you said, and I completely agree with what you said. So often you hear people who are basically just putting words into the vocal part so that the singer has some way to make sound that they can use to make melodies and other things with, that they're not as concerned with the actual setting of the text. So I like that you're going back to those to Dowland and Purcell for those kinds of things, because obviously they did a wonderful job. And melismas are really tricky in English, I think, much trickier in English than they are in Italian or French or Latin. So
well, yeah, they are, because part of it is that we don't use them, we don't find them as easily, and
we have a lot of gross vowels.
Well, we have a basic tradition. To me, the basic tradition of American song is what's called the American Songbook, the Great American Songbook, reaching to Gershwin, Irving Berlin, Cole Porter, Frank Lesser was one of the greats. All the songs that Frank Sinatra sang by people like Jimmy Van Heusen, those songs have very little melisma. They have quite a lot of beautiful vocalism to them, but it's not about melisma, and when you do have melisma, you've got to be a little bit careful. Melisma comes in much more in American pop song with the rock era, actually. I mean, you think of one of the first Beatle hits, you know. Oh yeah, I tell you something. Immediately, I and something. That's coming out of a country and a blues kind of a tradition, and it blocks them off in their text setting from the classic earlier pop song that existed pre-rock, pre-Elvis, pre-R&B on the radio from the 50s. So I think back to the people who are working in the non-melismatic style in syllabic, basically syllabic settings. Those are the simplest ones to do, but opera singers need melismas because melisma is about emotion. You're floating free of meaning, and in order to give you enough emotion, you need some place where it's just about the notes. You have to pick that very carefully in English, or it sounds very awkward. Half the syllables that you're setting won't work for melisma.
So you already have the libretto in hand for this. That's correct?
Yes, I have.
Does it ever become, taking all these things into consideration, does it become a negotiation ever, or do you go back to the librettist and discuss? Yeah.
I do. Here's a quick example, tiny change, where the very end of my opera, the white snake escapes death and says to the monk, "We shall meet again." And I looked at that and I said, she's a soprano. "We" is a very difficult vowel for sopranos. If I want to keep her up in the top register, which is where I want her for this moment in the opera, it's the biggest moment in the opera. And I said, "Cerise, would you mind, if we also wouldn't mind for clarity, if we change that "we" to "you and I shall meet again"? What could we do that?" And she said, "Done. Fine, happy to do it."
Yeah, if you say "we," it like encourages head voice singing automatically, it seems like.
Well, you can't. She's going to be in head voice no matter what I do. Mm-hmm. I've got to set her up there, except for actually I use the low E vowel where she's captured by the master, and she's put in a snake cage early on in the opera, and she says, "Free me." So Cerise has given me two E vowels there, and I said, okay, there she's going to go into chest voice. Free me. And that I said, oh, now that's really fun. But I don't want her singing "we" up above the staff. That's just awkward. You know, when Stephen Sondheim first wrote for soprano in Sweeney Todd, he gave her "Greenfinch and Linnet Bird." I've worked on that song. I teach musical theater. I've worked on that song with so many sopranos. It's almost impossible to sound comfortable singing those tight vowels. He has a great ear, obviously the best ear for this, but he didn't realize how difficult it was going to be for the soprano to make that work. Subsequently, his writing for soprano is better after Sweeney. Not that he's written very much for soprano. But I've been listening to this stuff very, very hard and working with Cerise on it. I mean, Cerise's libretto is brilliant. It's wonderful to work with anyway. It has all sorts of things that opera librettos need. That is, singers, ensembles conceived together, major kinds of statements about life and death that are worthy of being sung from an opera stage. You know, we all know the problem of American opera, modern opera, a friend of mine, a stage director, referred to it as the "please pass the peas" opera. You know, where you're saying normal things and you say, why are they singing this with an orchestra? This obviously should be a piece of dialogue. Some playwright wrote it, and yet we're working our way through this text. Well, Cerise understands that. She's already at opera pitch, emotional pitch for me. Well, as soon as I saw it, I said, oh, this definitely works. This works for an opera. We'll find a way to make it. And I've been having a wonderful time now for several months, and many more months to go before it's all put together.
That's true. I wonder if it's possible to write an opera that is on a small scale like that. Because I think there's a lot of interesting theater that can include the passing of the peas, so to speak.
That's right.
But I don't know. Is there a way to sing that? And maybe it's just a smaller opera with fewer principals or a smaller ensemble or something.
Yes.
But like you said, it is kind of silly.
And comic.
Yeah.
It can be if it's comic, and if you're willing to write fast stuff as we do in Broadway.
Right.
Right. I got the horse right here. His name is Paul Revere. If you can let an opera singer, that's Frank Lesser from Guys and Dolls, right? If you can go that fast, but opera singers, honestly, I've worked with them, and they say, "Oh, that's so hard." They think that's hard because they're not used to getting the words out. All of their training is about opening up the big sound and filling the room.
Right.
And they want to pull that technique into everything they do. And once you start doing that, I've got the horse right here. It's like, oh my God, you have a terrible, terrible time.
Well, and it's probably hard for them to draw a long, kind of romanticized melodic thing out when there's all those consonants chopping everything up like that.
Well, but you don't want to.
Well, sure. That's the thing that makes it silly.
If you're doing that, the daily life text of one of those interesting plays that we could have, then that's exactly what you don't want, is the long drawn-out line. But the singers naturally want to go there because they've been trained for that, and because that's what they're hired to do 90% of the time.
Yeah.
Do you think there's any space for a different style of singing in contemporary opera that is not that big fill the Metropolitan Opera space?
Sure. There are a number of singers who know how to do that, and when I'm Emperor of Opera, they'll all be hired.
Right. Well, for me,
all the people that know how to sing Sondheim, right?
Exactly.
Right. That's the test. If you can sing the Sondheim book,
then we're getting into the next issue, which is microphones.
Ooh.
You see, because they need the Sondheim singer needs a mic.
Yeah.
And then are we allowed to do that in opera? Well, I'm okay with it.
Yeah,
a lot of opera people aren't yet.
Yeah. I mean, I'm curious to see if opera will continue to develop and embrace things like microphones, because you're talking about a style, a performance practice and style that's derivative of needing to be loud enough, at least in part, be loud enough to be heard over an ensemble, and so the people who are in the back of the hall can hear you.
Yes, entirely technical.
Yeah, what effect does it have when, you can, like, I just had this discussion with a student because she's using microphones, and we talked about sotto voce kind of has a more personal, intimate feel, but what does it mean when you can take sotto voce and make it super loud, so it still has the quality of a soft, but it's very loud because of amplification? That's
right. There are many approaches there. Most of them have been unsuccessful. John Adams is successful at it. John Adams' operas are done everywhere, and he asks for mics. When his Dr. Atomic was done at the Met, they were mic'd.
Wow,
That's
I didn't
great.
realize that, actually.
I think they were mic'd for Nixon, too.
Yeah, they have to be. They have to be. It's an electronic ensemble. Everything is mixed and controlled. That's great. That's terrific. The singer has to learn to adjust. I'm thinking, am I absolutely right about that? I'm pretty sure that's correct, that was true at the Met when I saw it, and
I think so.
That in general that his operas are mic'd. Certainly Steve Reich's singing is always mic'd. Phil Glass's singing is pretty much always mic'd.
Well, and their style is very poppy when you listen to it. It doesn't sound,
A lot of them, and that's good. That's good for the singers, and the opera singers have to learn how to do that. Now, the best miking that I ever heard was in the Lincoln Center Theater production of South Pacific. and there was a sound designer who did that show, and I said, I want him to do any opera of mine. You didn't feel like you were listening to Kelly O'Hara and Paolo Zott singing on a microphone in a big theater. You felt like they were just singing to you normally, but you heard them perfectly. And it didn't seem to be distorted in any way. That there is now the technology to do that, but it costs some money, and there are only a few people who seem to understand how to work it yet.
Right.
So I'd say we're not quite there all the time, but as we get there, I want in.
Well, and what's crazy is the Met will embrace the idea of hiring 24, Google PhD in computer science guys to run that preposterous machine, but they won't do the same thing for their audio setup. And it seems like the technology to do it should be getting, like you said, should be getting better every year, and I'm sure is getting better every year. And the ability to do it more easily and more cheaply should be getting better every year as well. One concern that I sometimes have when we think about miking singers, though, this is not a problem, I guess, for any other kind of music, so maybe it's not a problem for opera either, is the kind of spatial identity of the singer in a space on stage. Like, I know that this person is singing and the sound is coming from the left side of what I'm looking at, and they're having a conversation that's separate from this other kind of scene that's going on the right side over here. Is that a concern?
Yes, that one hasn't been solved yet, as far as I know.
That's something that we should be able to solve with technology for sure. Like,
Absolutely.
My smartphone can do lots of pretty fancy things.
Yeah. Right. Well, from an educational standpoint, it makes me wonder, like, do you think, or do you teach microphone technique to your students? Should opera singers be getting microphone technique in school?
So far, they don't need it. So far, that hasn't been a thing. Someday, if life moves on and we move on in our repertoire beyond the repertoire that's there, and we move into more opera companies regularly doing the microphone rep, then maybe that will become an issue. I teach musical theater. My students have to be able to go out and do Spring Awakening and American Idiot, and these are the shows that they're off doing. The Kinky Boots, have got somebody in that at the moment on Broadway, and they need to practice with a mic.
Mm-hmm.
So we work on how that works, the distance from the mic, the direction of it, what it changes about your vocal production, etc., so that they have a little practice at that.
Yeah, I mean, seems like there's two sides of it. There's I played in the pit for ragtime this summer, and all the singers just had this thing. When you see them close up, they got this thing taped to their head, right?
Yes, that's right.
And that's, to me, that's just a reinforcement tool. And it worked really well. You could hear the leads very well the way you needed to hear them. And then there's the idea of a microphone as an instrument, where you're using the microphone to make things happen, and not just with the goal being to make your voice louder.
Yeah.
So.
When we were in school at Michigan State, those of you that are watching and don't know, Sam, Patrick, and I all went to Michigan State University. There's a wonderful jazz voice professor there, Sonny Wilkinson. Did you guys ever go to a performance in which Sonny was singing?
Yeah,
I don't think I did.
So I remember this really striking moment the first time I saw her perform with a handheld mic, and depending on what exactly she was singing, she was moving the mic around during the performance of the song, and it was very clear that it was precise. Like, it reminded me of watching film of Clara Rockmore playing the theremin almost. When I sing this note, the microphone goes here, and when I sing this note, the microphone goes here, and it was very precisely moving around, and it didn't sound jarring at all. It sounded perfectly smooth and normal. It sounded like what she was trying to make. But it was clear that she had really practiced exactly where the mic needed to be for each of the sounds that she wanted to make. And I kept thinking, man, that looks like a lot of work to learn how to do that.
It's an extra technique. It's an extra technique, and it's judged, I'm sure, by ear.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Not by choreography.
Yeah.
Right. No, I mean, honestly, it looked kind of silly.
But it sounds great.
It sounded great.
The good singers, I assume, have to learn how to make their choreography look more natural and smooth and like a part of their natural inflective body motions and what have you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, that's interesting. It's refreshing to talk to someone who's so ingrained in opera culture, who is not sort of dogmatically opposed to amplification. Because we've had lots of people on the show, and the overriding, let's say, against among stodgy academic types, has been no microphone.
Well, there's something very beautiful about the natural sound, but the whole creation of the modern opera house has distorted that in a funny way that isn't actually part of the original intent of natural sound.
Mm-hmm.
So there are many, many aspects to this discussion, and we all have to be a little more flexible sometimes.
Yeah. See, that's so reasonable.
Well, I mean, it's not going to happen anytime real soon at the Met.
Yeah.
At most of those opera houses, for all their problems, they have a going concern with the way they're handling things right now. So they're not going to change it right away. But Boulez said we should blow up all the opera houses 40 years ago or something like that. He was thinking of this. He liked electronics and he liked all sorts of things, and he was saying, hey, come on, this is all just taking up our artistic space and funding and everything else, and it's not getting us anywhere. We're absolutely treading water with 90%, 95% of what's going on in the world of music. Stop it. Let's do the new stuff. Let's bring the life of the mind, the life of exciting creation into our musical lives.
I think that's a lovely sentiment.
That impulse is not out of date.
Right. Yeah, it seems like he said that 40 years ago, and it seems like that's the conversation we have all the time still.
Still.
Yeah.
Still. Why is that?
Just blow up all the opera houses, though.
No, it was just a nice idea.
We'll blow our funding on actually getting the explosives.
Homeland Security is monitoring this hangout, by the way.
Yeah, you said blow up 2 times. Now we're all on a list somewhere.
That's right. Well, let's move on. I mean, I think we could nerd out.
We won't store this podcast in iCloud, so it'll be secret.
That's fine. No, we should talk about the orchestral record that we're
Yes.
I've taken more than half of the show already just chatting about opera, but it's fun.
No, it's been great.
It's fun to talk to you about that.
So you have a new CD of orchestral music out on the BMOP record label, and so why don't you tell us about these pieces and how new they are and how they came about and all that?
Yeah. Well, the earliest of them is way back from 1987, and it was my first orchestra piece. And the idea, I was afraid to write an orchestra piece because I was afraid it would never get done. I didn't know how I was going to get an orchestra piece done. I was writing chamber pieces that I could conduct myself with my ensemble Dinosaur Annex, and I was recently out of school and everything. So I said, sure, let's. All right, but the Koussevitzky. I applied for a Koussevitzky, and they gave me a grant, and they said this is going to be an orchestral piece, and we gave me what at the time was quite a lot of money for it. I can't remember what it was, but it seemed like a lot, and I said, okay, I guess I'm going to have to write a symphony. So I had been working up to it, though, through a bunch of little pieces. In a summer course, I had been working with Peter Maxwell Davis at the Dartington Summer School, and every time he got us to a new group of composers, he would say, okay, tomorrow come back with a piece. Everybody write a piece for tomorrow. Here are your instruments. And then I'll show it to them, and he'd say, great. Copy the parts out, and you conduct the performance of it this afternoon with those players sight reading. I said, gulp. And I came up with this little bitty thing that I chose the instruments that were my friends back in Boston so that I could do it with them. And it was 3 clarinets and string trio, as I recall. And I called it Postcard Overture because it was a postcard from England back to Boston. I was writing for my Boston players, essentially. And I said, okay, this is fun. And guess what? I wrote a 6-minute piece in a day. sort of. I had to fix it and do all sorts of things with it eventually. I'm sure maybe it wasn't even 6 minutes at first, but in any case, I somehow did it. And I said, this is exciting. Maybe this is a key. So I expanded it. I expanded the basic idea of it into something that I called a pocket concerto. And it was for like 9 players. And then I got into the Wellesley Composer Conference, and they had a whole chamber orchestra, and I said, okay, I'm going to expand it again. And the pocket concerto became a chamber orchestra piece. And I said, I could see how this could be a full orchestra. And I could see how I was building myself up in confidence to the idea that I could write a symphony. And then the Koussevitzky came along, and I said, okay, I'm going to do it. Somehow I've got to find a way to take all of my interests in the tiniest of, and the oddest and most precise and intimate chamber music, and take those interests in something that seems still interesting to me and write a great big symphony. So I called it Northern Lights, and I moved on, and that has to do with the fact that the one symphonic composer that I really, really hooked on to was Sibelius. And I said, there's a key to that somehow, that if Sibelius can somehow connect to Stefan Volpe and Ralph Shapey, who were my modernist idols about that time, then I've got a way to write a symphony and find it that would feel like it was special to me in my own voice. So I wrote it, and this is his first recording. It's had a couple of performances, readings really, since then, and I hope it gets out there and people can hear it. It's a lot of fun.
Why don't we go ahead and listen to the pick of the week? We're going to be listening to the beginning of the second movement of Northern Lights. Still and Granitic.
Still and Granitic, is that the title of the movement?
That's the title of the movement.
Okay.
Tempo marking.
So this is the Boston Modern Orchestra project under Gil Rose. So that was an excerpt that you just heard from Northern Lights by our guest, performed by our guest Scott Wheeler, performed by the Boston Modern Orchestra Project under Gil Rose. And you can listen to the whole thing on SoundCloud. It's very cool. So I can hear all of those little intricate, precise things. It feels large because it is a big orchestra, but it also feels very intimate and chamber-like. It's very, very cool juxtaposition.
Thank you. The big chords there are a matter of opening up space, silence there. That was a nice comment that Max Davis gave in class one day. He said, one of the most dramatic things you can do for an audience is to make them wait.
Yeah.
You know, you don't you always we always want to fill up our stuff. We say, I don't want to bore anybody. I want to keep writing things and you know and fill it in. But actually, not writing, leaving open space, is a really good way to keep people actually engaged.
And those huge hits make that space feel so much more meaningful, right? Because it makes the space bigger.
It's piano, marimba, and anvil.
Yeah.
That's the orchestration doubling there. It was a good guess. I had never written for orchestra before, but that worked out pretty well. That came out right the first time I heard it, and I said, yeah, that's the sound I want.
Yeah.
Well, it's very nice. To me, it's interesting how it creates sort of it doesn't really flesh it out very well, but it creates counterpoint between like a herd of elephants and a schizophrenic wasp or something. You get this crash, and then you get this small sound that's existing there in the space.
Yeah.
And as that goes back and forth, you feel like something's about to happen.
You know, when you mentioned counterpoint, you're right. And counterpoint, people get confused about counterpoint because we study it in school coming out of Bach. Mm-hmm. And that kind of counterpoint is very hard to keep interesting in a post-tonal context.
Yes.
Anything past about Beethoven, counterpoint starts to become a texture. It's a single device. It isn't actually the way the imitations work or something like that. It doesn't have the same kind of interest. Listen to how smart Shostakovich is when he does fugues, for instance. He understands that it is just a texture, and he changes it much, much more than the Bach on which it's modeled.
Right. I think Bach and people from that time are solving a puzzle, because that's sort of what they were obsessed with. Mechanically solving the world is what they thought they were going to do. And you figure out your fugue subject, and you put it through this sort of mechanical process, and it achieves its own sense of satisfaction by doing so. And I don't think modern composers think of a fugue that way.
Yeah, it's a broader principle. I have the same discussion with my students all the time regarding consonance and dissonance and what that means. And it's not just these two notes clash and these other two notes don't, but you can make consonance and dissonance out of all kinds of musical things.
Well, right. And counterpoint, I think that modern counterpoint, to me, the locus classicus of modern counterpoint is Ives' unanswered question.
Yeah. You don't get much more starkly divided than that, this versus that.
Yeah, exactly. We need to hear things in truly different rhythmic dimensions if they're going to register to the modern ear when you don't have the subtleties of the tonal system to guide you through.
Yeah.
We have to do rather cruder things, but those crude things can be pretty cool, actually, as in the Ives.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very. I like that you do kind of point out the benefit that we got from that tonal system is the direction, right? The through line that we can latch onto and follow all the way through. And we kind of, when we get rid of that, have to provide something to serve that role.
And the smart composers all did. Schoenberg, Stravinsky are full of these amazing things, and those are our kind of models to look out to.
Yeah.
And I don't think I'm inventing anything. I think I'm playing a personal take on a lot of stuff that's out there, listening to a lot of my friends and a lot of the great works of the past, and you say, oh, here's a way. I don't think I've heard this before. Let me see if I can give that a try.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Take what you need.
Yeah.
So should we move into some of our stories for the week?
Let's do it.
We are. Let's see. Let's try to
streaming.
To briefly go through these. There's a big post this week on a post. It's literally in the magazine. Alex Ross wrote a piece in the New Yorker about the classical cloud, is what it's called, and it's about his experience with streaming music services for classical music, and he is completely wedded to his plastic CDs, and he sings the praises of his CDs, and we on this show in the past have sung the praises of not having physical stuff. So Sam, what did you think about when you were reading Alex Ross this week?
Well, I think Alex is talking about, for him, he's talking about how the artifacts contribute to his own aesthetic experience and his own procedural, like, day-to-day life, like his job. He has a way of doing his job that involves pulling out a CD, listening to it, and putting it physically on this pile to listen to later. And it's dividing up your interests according to musical content is, for him, I guess, easier when you have physical objects to latch that onto rather than creating a folder in, your Chrome browser or whatever and putting the stream of that song. But also just the experience similar to what people describe in experiencing in the record store. We're just thumbing through the titles and finding, oh, I haven't seen that in a while, I haven't listened to that in a while, or picking something at random, which you don't really get the same because, as Alan Pearson wrote sort of a response to this, he says he uses Google Music for most of his listening, and, there's no such thing, and this is a good thing and a bad thing, I guess, but for me, when I'm using Google Music, which I do, there's no such thing as a random thing. It's suggesting stuff to me based on what I've listened to, what I have in my library, what I've purchased and then added to my library. So there's nothing random about the things that I might see and might decide to listen to there, right?
Yeah, and I think all of the things that he's talking about doing with CDs and putting them in a physical stack and things like you could do that just by making, even in a text file on your computer, make a list of the things that are in your current rotation thing. None of the things that he was doing with CDs struck me as something that required the physical object. It's simply his workflow, like you're saying. His workflow requires the physical object, but sometimes we have to develop new workflows.
So he does address the idea of who's getting paid and how, but certainly I don't think that's the focus of his piece. We've talked a lot about the upsides and downsides of streaming and how artists get paid from that streaming. That's not really the focus of it. It's more about the other effects of switching off of physical media.
Yeah, I'm also pretty concerned, and he touches on this a little bit with the metadata issue.
That's a big problem.
And Alan Pearson mentions this in his response as well. He has a screenshot of a John Adams piece, I think it is, or maybe a John Luther Adams, in his Google Play Music interface, and it only says the artist is John Luther Adams. You get no indication of who's performing, and that's very annoying. Sometimes you get the opposite. You get only the performer and not the composer, which is equally frustrating. And then people try to do weird things like putting composers and performers' names in the title of the track, which is annoying because that's not the title of the track. And we still have not solved this. And one of the problems...
If only people use that composer line more.
So you have the composer line in some applications, but you do not have access to it in Google Play Music.
Oh, I didn't know
can't
that.
show it. You can't edit it from Google Play Music. So that's the source of a lot of frustration. You can't edit the metadata at all if you're streaming. If you're using Spotify, I can't go in and say, hey, this is incorrect. And I find stuff on Spotify that's labeled incorrectly all the time just because I listen to a lot of unusual stuff that not enough people have found is incorrect yet. So it is really frustrating. The problem is the services and the products that we use to listen to music are the same products and services that people use to listen to pop music. And so they are structured around the much, 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 much larger side of the market, which is the pop music side. We are not a big enough size thing for anybody to pay attention to our needs or much less our desires for the features and functions that a product should have.
Yeah.
And maybe, who knows, maybe the ability to make a service cheaply enough will let somebody make a service that is for us, that has the right things for us. But I would be concerned then that I would not get to hear about the stuff that's outside of the things that are on that service, right? I was playing a bunch of stuff in Spotify the other day, and Spotify popped up a little thing that said, hey, you've listened to a lot of The Bad Plus. Did you know that The Bad Plus has a new album out? I bet you would like it. And so I clicked it and listened to it, and sure enough, it was killer.
It's amazing.
It's great. You should check it out. And this is a problem that I'm not sure that there's a great solution to. Even the Music Business Association has this conference summit thing every year, and the last 2 times they've done it, they've released like a metadata best practices document for labels who are putting together their metadata and preparing things for sale on digital download sites and for streaming services and stuff like that. And they've done it twice now, so there are 2 versions of it. And the most updated one, which just came out in the middle of August this year, about a month ago as I'm recording this, had all these things about, the non-classical composer. If you've got a non-classical piece, you do this. And so I'm looking through this document, so like, okay, well, what do you recommend for classical music? It's not there. They actually do not have a recommendation. They do not mention a composer field, even though the most commonly used ID3 track tag format has a space for composer. They don't mention it in this document. And in their like stuff we still have to deal with section at the bottom of this best practices document, I think they call it a metadata style guide. It says for the future we need to figure out how to deal with classical music. You think?
Yeah, well, it's because who's in charge of the streaming services are the people that have the most money wrapped up in it, and that's pop music. And that system works perfectly as a single point of entry metadata thing. If you say Foo Fighters, that's all the information you need to find Foo Fighters music. But people don't often say, "Ooh, that's a great song that somebody wrote for the Foo Fighters. I want to see every song written by that songwriter." That doesn't happen very much, but it happens a lot to us.
And Spotify has made a push lately of getting their metadata better for classical music, and they made a big deal a couple of months ago about putting the composer's name in the artist field, and it drove me crazy because that is bad. That is not what is happening. Yeah. That person, the artist is the performer, and you're making the problem worse by mixing them all up in that one messed up field.
Yeah. So, Scott, do you have experience using streaming music services either for your personal enjoyment or, more interesting to me, in educational context?
No, all my students use it, but I don't. I don't use it very much. I find it frustrating, I'm afraid. I have an insight into this, though. I haven't read Alex's article, but I did meet Alex when he was at Harvard, and you know what? He was a DJ. He probably talks about it in the article. He worked for WHRB, so he grew up. He started out working with all of those physical CDs in a huge, huge, gorgeous library of every conceivable thing that was there. Mm-hmm. So I'm wondering if that maybe has something to do with his own background on the situation. Mine is just that I'm lazy, and it's easier for me to deal with the CDs and put them into my own library. I listen to them electronically. I don't listen to them on CDs. I do listen to them on iTunes and an iPod, but I don't do the streaming thing.
Well, the coolest educational context for streaming, 2 words, scrolling scores on YouTube. Most of the Warhorse pieces that we're going to study, like in my form and analysis class right now, 80% of them have a good recording with a scrolling score on YouTube.
That's wonderful.
It is really wonderful because I don't have to play it and then have a separate document that actually shows the score so we can talk about it. I'll pause it and just use a laser pointer and point at the screen. It works fantastically.
Yeah. That's very cool.
With my comp students, I use collaborative playlists on Spotify. Mm-hmm. So when I want to assign them something to listen to, they can subscribe to this playlist, and I can just drag some tracks over into it. And then if they have a thing that they say, hey, I've been listening to this a lot lately, and I want to try to do something like it, they can do the same thing and drag a track into it, and I can listen to it.
I have Music 123, Spotify playlist, and a YouTube playlist. Because if the recording is high quality enough and it's got a scrolling score, which the Stravinsky Piano Sonatas is a great performance. It's a great scrolling score. I just assigned somebody that was listening. So yeah, to me it's invaluable, and I almost get, of course I have this sense of entitlement now where if I look up a piece and there's not a scrolling score of a Brahms piano sonata, I'm like, what's wrong with you, Internet?
Yeah. Well, and another thing that we're not dealing with here is, and this is something that is kind of I think in the subtext of Alex's piece here, is the just romantic idea of a physical object. This is the book lover thing for people that don't like ebooks, that they like the feel of the pages, and that's great. It is cool, but it's not practical, right? And those things are going away. I talked in my music business class just last week about some sales figures that came out this summer from Nielsen and Billboard about the decline of not only physical sales. Physical sales have been declining for a long, long time, but also digital download sales are going down. Everything is moving to streaming. From the first half of this year compared to the first half of last year, digital track sales are down like 13%, and digital streaming is up about 40%. So, not only are physical sales being replaced, but digital sales are being replaced by the streaming thing. Now, the weird quirk about it is the rise in vinyl sales, which first half of 2013 to first half of 2014 went up about 40%. So
yeah, that's actually people who are physical object oriented. That's like the even more special physical object.
I mean, and that's what it's about. I don't think anybody has the illusion that it's about the analog sound. It's about having a cool object, the giant album art on it.
What do you think is the reason for the rise in popularity of vinyl? Like, if it's always been around since for decades. Like, why now? Why right now in the past few years has vinyl spiked?
That I don't know. That is an interesting question. I think part of it has to do with the fact that it has to have gone away for long enough that it is seen as a novelty again, right? Because when CDs first came out, there were still plenty of people selling vinyl because cassettes were a terrible format. But they had to kind of go away because at the beginning they were thought of as the old-timey, like, out-of-date thing. And now they're seen as a new thing again. Like, it's almost like they had to go away before they could come back, like bell bottoms.
Well, there could be people in their 30s. There could be people in their 30s and 40s who are now starting to collect some vinyl who have never held a record in their hand before they started this new collection.
Oh yeah, I got a roommate who's doing that right now. He's in love with it.
So
I know people that collect vinyl that do not have a record player.
I inherited from my father-in-law recently a very, very nice record player, so I actually might start buying some vinyl myself.
It's a pain to listen to vinyl. It's so much more convenient to listen to Spotify.
That's right.
It's kind of a social thing, I think, too.
Yeah.
Like having people over, perusing through a library, taking out a vinyl.
That's another thing that Alex mentions, that he likes having this series of spines, and I think that's a cool thing as well. And that, I think, is another part of this whole thing. We now can have so much stuff in our collection so easily that we can listen to all this different stuff, and it's great for opening our ears and experiencing new stuff all the time. And when we buy a physical thing to bring into our homes, which are very small in many cases, so our physical space is limited. We are giving up, this much space to this physical object, so therefore it is a meaningful object that we want in our lives. We are curating a much more distilled sense of what we feel strongly about than we were when everything had to be physical. So I think that is what Patrick pointed out, a really cool thing about it. And the physical books that I have on my bookshelf are the handful of things that I wanted to make sure that I kept in their physical formats.
Right. I think it, from a composer standpoint, not having if the physical object and making the physical object be the main way you actually listen to music encourages more fixation on individual pieces. You know what I mean? Like when I first listened to Michael Tippett's Fourth Symphony, I had it on CD, or I checked it out from the library on CD, you know, and I obsessed over that piece. And I don't think, had I had the world of streaming whatever I could possibly think of available, that I would have necessarily fixated on that one piece so much.
Interesting.
Well, New Music USA has a new.
Well, they're on their third round of these new project grants. So we talked about them revamping their project grant program, but they just made an announcement about how they're going to be allocating their money. Sam?
Basically, smaller ponds and more fish. So one of the feedback they got was they wanted more money going. Whoa! More money going out to. What's happening?
That's all right.
More money going out for smaller projects, which, you know, is the same kind of complaint people have made about the NEA quite a bit. That especially since the NEA doesn't fund private projects anymore, they just fund organizations that then fund big projects. So the little guy gets left out. So what's interesting to me is that New Music USA not just completely revamped their grant granting process, but also like being willing to continue to morph it to suit the needs of the stakeholders involved.
Yeah, so you're going to have a better opportunity to get a grant, and the grants that are available will be smaller. They're not getting rid of the biggest grants. They're just going to shift to giving away fewer of the bigger grants in favor of many, many more smaller grants. So that's a good thing, and then they're focusing on what I think it's $3,000 and under. So I think that's probably going to be of benefit to a lot of people who may have missed out on the project grants the last couple of rounds. So if you are in that category, you'll have a better shot this round. So certainly try again. The BBC is continuing to respond on the issue of the proms that we spoke about last week.
Burt Whistlegate trademark.
Are we really gating Burt Whistlegate?
I am. I wrote it in the doc.
Well, whatever. Burt Whistlegate.
No, I'm sorry. He's our composer, and I have to say no.
So we spoke last week. The proms were performing. It was the BBC Youth Orchestra was performing a concert as part of the prom series. It was on television. The BBC televised the entire concert as they usually do, except for one single 3-minute-long piece by Harrison Birtwistle. And a lot of people were very upset that they did not get to hear the Birtwistle, and that the public did not get to hear the Birtwistle. To be fair, it is on the iPlayer, but not as many people are going to go check it out on the web as would see it in, on television. And a BBC spokesperson said, let me find this quote because it's kind of amazing. Gosh, I'm sorry, I should have this queued up.
May want to unmute Scott too.
Yeah, I tried to unmute Scott. I think he might.
Okay.
I can't unmute him. It's trying to not letting me unmute him.
Oh, there you
go.
go.
Are we on?
There you go. Yeah, we got you. Were you gonna add something there, Scott?
No, I'm just listening. I know I've been following this too. I want to hear what you say.
Well, it's really disappointing, and the BBC is trying to defend this decision. And here's what the BBC spokeswoman said. Putting the proms on television inevitably involves an element of editorializing. Sometimes, for various reasons, most notably scheduling, we have to omit certain works from the broadcasts. This has always been the case with the proms on television. In making those choices, the proms team and the commissioning editor have to bear in mind the audience, and that newer works are often less familiar to them. End quote. Okay. How do you think the audience is going to get more familiar with the music of Harrison Birtwistle? Do you think they will get more familiar with it by you not putting it on television or putting it on television.
And you know what else?
Absolutely maddening.
A good way to introduce newer music to an audience might be to pick a piece that's really short, like maybe around 3 minutes, so that you're not asking for 22-minute slog for a Messy Ann piece for 2 pianos. You know, we want 3 minutes of your time. That sounds pretty reasonable.
It doesn't sound reasonable because here's the argument that I've been hearing is that the BBC should not at all be concerned with viewership. Like they should not have an issue with, oh, we have to keep these viewers or listenership or anything like that.
That's true. They're a public broadcaster.
Yeah, so I don't know why, they're making those decisions, as if they were some sort of commercial station that has to make ratings.
Yeah. So there it is, BBC.
And there's a great piece. We'll link to this Guardian piece by Charlotte Higgins, and she quotes some composers who were commissioned specifically for this for the proms this year, whose works were not broadcast. And I was telling Sam before the show, can you imagine how disheartening it would be to, first how great it would be to find out that your music was going to be on national television in this wonderful performance that a lot of people watch, and then a few weeks out from that be told, oh yeah, but your piece isn't going to be on television. I would be crushed. I would be totally crushed.
Yep.
Do you have any thoughts, Scott?
I think that I'm glad that this is coming up in England. If it were applied in the United States, it would apply to almost everybody. All of those places are nonprofit institutions. They all get their money from the fact that it's tax-free contributions for those rich donors, and then they all treat it like a commercial project, where the object is to get as much money as possible for the big shot performers. Hey, how about serving the art of music a little bit? That's what you claim you're doing. So there, that's where the problem is. I agree that it's galling for the composer, but it's really something that we should say, hey, the art of music deserves to have a shot at continuing and being creative.
Yeah. I gotta say, I did last week watch I was in London to see a prom. It was my first prom, and it was really incredible.
And so you got to use the iPlayer while you were there, and you watched this piece?
Yeah, it's in fact not how I experienced the music.
No, I was saying, though, that you could, since you were in the United Kingdom and you had a local IP address, you could have used the iPlayer where we can't hear.
Right, exactly. It's country code restricted.
So how was it?
How was the prom?
You heard the piece.
I heard the whole concert because I was there. It wasn't that performance. It was a performance of the new piece on the program was Unsuk Kin's Concerto for Sheng in Orchestra.
Ooh,
which was very, very cool.
That's pretty cool.
It was a neat piece.
I would like to hear that.
All of Royal Albert Hall was completely full. It wasn't all white hair. It was standing room only. It was like it felt alive and well in a way that sometimes you go to perform.
Was Unsuk Chin's piece on television?
I'm not sure if that was a televised performance or not.
Yeah, it could have. Yeah, not every concert is on TV.
I think BBC Radio 3 broadcasts all the proms though, or most of them. Don't quote me on that.
All right,
but
I won't
anyway,
quote you on that. Then you can't be wrong.
Yes,
Patrick, you're right that there's a lot more of a sense that in England and in Europe and the continent too, there still remains a sense that there's a connection to the writing of music that is often lost in the United States.
I think so. I mean, the culture really developed for it, over in Europe in a way that I don't think translated over here, even when we were really starting to write serious music in the 19th century.
I remember going over there and being at some concert, listening to a lot of new music, and turning to somebody who was next to me and saying, "So are you a musician?" Now, you do that in the United States, and what do you think the answer is? Of course they are. right? And that was always, oh no, I'm just interested in new things. I say, well, where are you? We need you here in this country too. But the audiences aren't developed by the presenters, by the education, by whatever methods. They seem to still exist in England and on the continent.
Yeah, the whole culture for like wanting to consume classical music over there seems to be completely different than it is over here. Completely different.
Yeah.
There are still some there are some unfortunate similarities, but it's a lot healthier there.
Well, and I think the people that are standing up for this new music stuff would say that the BBC is starting to trend toward the American style of managing their network.
That's been going on for a while.
Yeah, and they're starting to have to compete more in their minds anyway with commercial products as well. So we'll see. I hope this is the last of that particular argument and that everything will be solved next time, because it's one of it's a big problem, and I don't think there is an easy solution to it, but it's not easy to implement. So
yeah, well, the way the situation is going in the United States, I think, is also made less. It's made harder to deal with because of a continuing stream of labor problems.
Ugh. I don't. We're already running long. I really don't want to talk about the Atlanta Symphony not getting their crap together again.
All we're going to say, we need to at least mention, is that right now, probably, since we're recording this on Sunday morning, right now, whether or not Atlanta is going to go on strike is probably being hashed out.
I don't think I'm going to be locked out.
Well,
I think they're more likely to be locked out than
something is going to happen, and I'm sure we'll have to talk about it. I know that we've gotten tired of talking about labor concerns, but it certainly relates to us, and that, I think, is just indicative of the problem with.
Interesting story about it, though, is that Maestro Spano wrote an open letter to the orchestra and the musicians about it, and usually, as we've seen in the past, music directors kind of steer clear of this thing because they're kind of not in the music group, and they're also kind of not in the executive group. So if that interests you, go read it. If it doesn't, don't. And if it gets to be a big enough thing that we need to talk about it on the show, we'll talk about it. But know that we know that it's happening and that we are also sick of it.
Yes.
So we're going to leave it there, Sam?
Let's leave it there.
Okay. That's going to do it for this week's episode of SoundNotion. Thank you, Scott, for being here. We really appreciate it. Do you have anything, last-minute things that you've come up with that you want to plug before we hang up the show?
Oh, no plugs. Just for your show. Thanks a lot, guys.
Well, thank you for being here. We really appreciate it. We had a great conversation. I was making note of some things that I want to make sure that I return to and share with some of my students about text setting. So it's a really interesting conversation and appreciate it.
So get the new album on BMOP Sound.
Yes, it is on BMOP Sound, and we will have links to all of those places where you can find the album, where you can stream it, where you can buy it, where you can even buy a physical CD if you are Alex Ross and listening to the sound of my voice. Hi, Alex. And everyone else you can get the digital download or stream it. But we'll have links to all of those things and more at soundnotion.tv/SN, where you can find not only the archives to this show, but to all our shows at soundnotion.tv. They're also all available in the iTunes podcast directory or wherever finer podcasts are aggregated. If you'd like to support the show, you can do so using, first, tell your friends about us. Give us good reviews in the iTunes store and all those things. But then, if you'd like to support us financially, you can use the Amazon affiliate search on our site. So if you are buying a regular whatever widget through Amazon, if you just find it through the search box on our site, we get a tiny little commission for sending you there. It doesn't cost you anything. If you're feeling generous in another way, you can use the donation links on our site. You can connect with us. We'd love to continue this conversation about the classical cloud and contemporary opera and the BBC broadcasting or not broadcasting the music of Harrison Birtwistle. We'd love to continue this conversation as well on social media. We're all on Twitter as a group. We're at SoundNotion. I'm at Dave McDowell. Patrick is at Vox Shibuya for his monthly SoundNotion visit, and Sam is at Housegoy. You know we do the show every week, right, Patrick?
I keep forgetting.
Okay. So hopefully we'll see Patrick back next week. He did indeed write our music that you heard at the beginning of the show. So thank you so much for doing that, and we will see you back next week.
All right.
Thanks, Scott.
Okay, I got to go eat breakfast, then I'll do the notes. And then I have to go fix a clarinet, and then I have to figure out